Marvel's got its first real cosmic entity in the Ultimate Universe, which is just in time for the Maker War, because don't forget, the return of the Maker in the Ultimate Universe is right around the corner. So, this is Ultimate Wolverine, and what this does here is this picks up in the aftermath of the Eurasian Republic. So basically, Colossus and his sister Illyana orchestrating the destruction of the Resistance, what you and I might call the X-Men, right? A very loose band of X-Men. They certainly weren't organized in the way that we're traditionally used to, but every one of them, except for Wolverine, was eradicated using a bomb made out of the mind of Professor Charles Xavier. Now, there is going to be a huge caveat to that, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but what goes on is as Wolverine is traveling to the Eurasian Republic, we get this kind of monologue, right, where he says, "Deja vu, that's what they call it. I keep feeling like I'm living the same day again and again, the same nightmare. Every time I feel like I get on top, something comes and smacks me back down again. It's like the universe is against me, telling me to sit down and shut up. But me, I never cared much for being pushed around, told what to do or who to do it for. I guess that's just in my nature. And there is no one left but me and this bucket of bolts. So it's up to me to call the play. The guy with the bad temper, the guy with the knives in his knuckles, the guy with an axe the size of the Republic to grind." Now, here's the thing to know. Wolverine is currently riding inside of David Haller, right? Traditionally, we know him as Legion in Marvel Comics, but in the Ultimate Universe, he was basically killed, or at least supposedly killed, by the Maker when he was younger. He turned his mind into computer code, and now he exists inside of a Sentinel. So David Haller, as the Omega level mutant with thousands of personalities, each one having a power of its own, that's not really the kind of Legion that you see here, but it is a very powerful weapon nonetheless. Having a living Sentinel at your disposal, that's no small thing. But this is a mission for Wolverine and Wolverine alone. And so he says, "Sounds familiar, right? Reminds me of something that me and Victor used to say. Same crap, different day." And he says, "Guess it's my MO. So here I go again. Deja vu, coming right at you." And he starts heading for the Eurasian Republic. Now, at that point, you switch over to Director Prostovich, who's basically the one overseeing what is, in effect, Russia's version of Weapon X, which, again, one of the things that we've talked about over the course of the Ultimate Wolverine series is that that does exist in the main Marvel universe, right? Weapon X started as a joint venture between the United States and Canada in the main Marvel universe. It seemingly has the same history here in the Ultimate Universe, but instead, there came a point where Wolverine, after getting his adamantium, was taken by the Eurasian Republic and in turn turned into the Winter Soldier. Except unlike the Weapon X program, they basically seem to have perfected it, right? He was the perfect assassin until he was taken by the Resistance, and then David Haller undid his brainwashing. But here's the funny thing, right? The Doctor and the staff are kind of talking about what to do here. Specifically, they're talking about the Phoenix specimen, right? Saying that it's been rejecting protocol, that without the Xavier specimen, and that's kind of the crazy thing, is because when it came to the Xavier brain that was being used by the Eurasian Republic, the Xavier brain was a form of mind control, right? The Xavier brain was controlling the Phoenix specimen, and the Phoenix specimen was controlling all the different weapons that the Eurasian Republic had created, including Wolverine. And we'll actually circle back around to that here in a minute, because not even Wolverine knows everything that's going on. But one of the things that the director says, right, harvesting the Phoenix specimen, this is the most powerful mutant we have at our disposal. But that's where she's told it, right? It is a specimen. We don't look at it as a person, but I think it's the only logical choice, director. If we cannot rely on the specimen to follow protocol, then we must find a way for it to be more useful. With the opposition gone, the new XS unit could control the Phoenix specimen. Now, the XS unit, as it's been kind of presented to us so far, is basically a blend between Sentinels and traditional humans. Not that dissimilar from someone like Karima in the main Marvel universe. If you don't know what that means, not a great big huge deal. But when we were initially introduced to the XS specimens, actually, as you guys pointed out, which I didn't catch, you guys caught it. That's why I love reading the comments whenever I make videos. One of them has the head, basically, of Cyclops in its stomach, right, firing off optic blasts. The other one is basically the body of Havoc, which would actually make a lot more sense. I thought it was the body of Cyclops. It kind of made sense to me, right? Like, one is the body, the other one's the head. But as we all know, the powers of Cyclops and Havoc don't work on each other. They cancel each other out. So they're kind of perfect partners in that way. But what really seems to be going on here is the idea of taking the Phoenix specimen and basically making another XS unit out of it, right? So using the Phoenix specimen, turning it into a Sentinel, and then using it as a form of control. Because lest we forget, right, the Eurasian Republic are currently, or essentially, agents of the Maker. They're not direct agents of the Maker, but they're agents nonetheless. But that's where the director says, we do not know that the opposition is gone. The riots have quieted, and we have cut off the opposition's head. Still, a headless chicken can run. But regardless, while the director keeps talking, right, the other guy's just kind of like, what's that in the sky? And like Wolverine just comes crashing through the window, right? And immediately kills the first guy, right? Just takes him out in the blink of an eye. And then after that, he immediately goes after the director. Now, it's not to kill her. It's really to subdue her more than anything else, but she does call for the XS units. Now, this is just kind of wrapping up plot threads, but Wolverine takes these guys out with a quickness, specifically the Cyclops unit, because it just says, right, intruder halt. And Wolverine's just like, yeah, I heard you the first time, and immediately goes after him. Now, he does get hit with the optic blast, but as we know, Cyclops' blasts are concussive blasts. It's not heat vision. Now, he can make the blast thin enough to where it can slice through stuff, but it doesn't really kill Wolverine. Instead, Wolverine cuts the head off of this thing. So now you have a headless unit with the head of Cyclops in its stomach. It cannot control itself. So it's just firing off optic blasts all over the place. And so, of course, Wolverine finishes this thing off before it can demolish the entire facility because there's something that he needs. And so that's when he goes to the director and he says, you have a lot of lives that you owe me. And where she says, I'll do whatever it is that you say, he kind of laughs at the idea. He was like, ain't that a trip? Because from his perspective, she was in control of everything. And for the longest time, she was. But it really raises an important question. Who's really running things? The person giving the orders to the person who controls the troops, or the person controlling the troops? And the reality here is that it's the person controlling the troops, because they could turn them on the person that's telling them what to do with the troops pretty much any moment that they choose to, because the troops are loyal to the people that give them direct orders. At least that's how I imagine it. And so in this particular instance, right, he says, you are going to take me to the woman whose voice I heard in my head. You are going to take me to the Phoenix specimen. And so they kind of do. There's a moment or two of them just sort of traveling to the location. There's really nothing special about this outside of the fact that it's like the elevator at the end of the hall, right? And then she runs over a kind of access code that allows her to enter into the area. But of course, Wolverine tells her, right, I'm keeping these claws to the back of your head to make sure that we're actually going where you say we are going, because I will kill you if we're not. But when he gets in there, he says, something smells rotten down here. Now, that's going to be important. Keep that in the back of your head, because that will be cycled back around to. But in response to his statement that something smells rotten down here, he says, but when you're involved, I guess you haven't noticed. And where she initially kind of starts to beg, he says, you are not in a position to ask for favors. And he says, now, go open the door. And she does, right? She opens this door to reveal this Phoenix specimen. And she says, she's in there. And she says, Winter Soldier, meet the Phoenix specimen. And he asks her, right, what are you doing to her? And that's where the director says, she's one of the most powerful mutants I have ever come across. We used her as an antenna, sending out signals to control our various agents. You were one of them. Now, here is an important statement. It's easy to gloss over, and it's very easy to miss. She is one of the most powerful mutants I have ever come across. This means that the director has come across others. Now, it could very well be that one of these others was Professor Xavier, but it's also entirely possible that there's someone like Franklin Richards or things along those lines, right? I mean, don't forget, in the original Ultimate Universe, Franklin Richards got the Phoenix Force, right? Franklin Richards existed. He wasn't necessarily as cosmically powerful in the original Ultimate Universe as he is in the main Marvel Universe, but a lot of that's just the differences between these two realities. The Ultimate Universe was originally, and still is, a more toned down and quote-unquote realistic depiction of the Marvel Universe. So you don't really have levels of power on that scale. But in this, you do. Because one of the things that Wolverine says is he says, you still talk like we are not creatures with thoughts and feelings and souls, but it could be you up there. You're the least human out of everyone in this room. Lower her down. And the director does, right? The director brings down Jean Grey. And Wolverine approaches her, and he just says, "Howdy, lady." And he says, "I have heard your voice in my head. Even though I was doing awful things, terrible things, it was the one thing that centered me, made me feel home. I can't describe it exactly." Now, that's an important thing, because one of the things that was kind of hit on over the course of the Ultimate Wolverine comic was that seemingly, for some reason that was never really explained here, the Eurasian Republic and the Directorate X program was never really able to get a 100% hold on Wolverine. They were never able to convert him entirely and completely. Instead, there was always that one part of him that was resisting the programming. Now, the part of him was small enough to where he ultimately became the Winter Soldier and would go out and engage in a series of conflicts and kill whoever it was that the Directorate X program wanted him to kill. But the fact is, some part of him was always holding out. And while we never really got a direct explanation, for the longest time, we could have considered it to be his nature, or just Wolverine being Wolverine, no one ever really controls him, like that kind of thing. The same kind of logic that led to him escaping in the main Marvel Universe from the Weapon X program. But now we're finding out it was Jean. It was Jean who had a kind of psychic link with Wolverine, and at the very least was preventing him from being totally overtaken by the Eurasian Republic. And so that's the crazy thing, is because he says again, right, "What's that smell? Do you smell that?" Almost like, and then that's when Illyana shows up and says, "Brimstone." And she says, "There's a reason for this." And then she turns to Director Prostovich. She says, "You are helping the enemy steal Republic property. Did you really think that you could walk away from this unscathed?" And kills her on the spot. Now, Illyana and Colossus have a beef with Wolverine. It's not enough that he turned against them and joined the resistance. At the end of the day, for them, it was just the loss of a weapon, right? Like losing a gun or sword or something like that. A very powerful gun or a very powerful sword. But was it a huge inconvenience? Not necessarily, because in their mind, they could always find new mutants and they could always turn those mutants into weapons. What pissed them off was the fact that Wolverine killed Omega Red, who was a member of the family. That's the real grudge they have with him. And so in that moment, when he says, "Hell of a time for a family reunion," Colossus says, "Family? Do not speak to me of family." Because Wolverine killed a member of his family, right? And so in that moment, Colossus immediately subdues Wolverine. Right, now here's the funny thing. You could make a credible argument that Colossus could do this at any point in time, but one of the things to keep in mind here is that Wolverine's adamantium in the Ultimate Universe, much like the original, is not as strong, durable, and unbreakable as the main Marvel Universe adamantium. It's kind of a weaker version of it. But regardless, even if you look at something like Wolverine Revenge, right, the Jonathan Hickman story, it's one of these things where Colossus literally subdued him in that story as well. So you can make a credible argument that Colossus could take out Wolverine at any point in time. And that's exactly what happens here, right? He just lifts Wolverine into the air and he was like, "This was once our most fearsome asset, Illyana. This puny thing." And Illyana says, "I almost feel sorry for him, brother. First, we kill his playmates, and then his doctor." And Colossus just says, right, "To think of the resources we spent on this failure. So small." And in that moment, Wolverine pops his claws and then just immediately attacks Colossus. Not enough to kill him, but it is enough to scratch his face. But that's why I say the adamantium is not necessarily as durable. Assuming Colossus has the same powers in the Ultimate Universe as he does in the main Marvel Universe, it's osmium metal. Osmium metal is incredibly durable. It's got an astronomically high heat tolerance point and an incredibly low cold tolerance point. He can survive into the thousands of degrees, right? It's nuts what kind of elements Colossus can basically withstand. But the fact that Wolverine's only able to scratch his face, again, adamantium in this Ultimate Universe, not as capable as the main Marvel Universe. But nonetheless, Colossus is pissed. And so Wolverine's just like, I mean, come on, right? I'll take the two of you on at the same time. And that's exactly what happens, right? Illyana comes running at him, Colossus comes running at him, and because he is a hardened killer, he's able to hold his own. He doesn't kill either one of them, but he is able to hold his own. And in that moment, Colossus just says, "I tire of these games." And Illyana just says, "Brother, you forget the Winter Soldier is a wild beast, and a wild beast must be tamed by its master." And so summoning in her powers, she immediately subdues Wolverine, right? Just kind of has him strapped down. And she says, "You see, he can be tamed. Brother, do you have anything to say to this creature. And Colossus just says, creature, indeed. And he says, now, let us talk. But in that moment, when he's about to tear Wolverine limb from limb, literally rip him apart, his head starts going haywire. Literally, Colossus just starts screaming about his head, right? He can't move, he can't function, he can't do anything. And Illyana's just like, what's happening to you? And Colossus just says, right, it burns, right? It burns. And then in that moment, Wolverine turns around and Jean Grey is standing there. Not just Jean channeling the full power of the Phoenix Force. And he's just like, oh crap. And Magic just says, brother, tell me what to do. Like, tell me what's wrong. And he just says, run, sister, run. Because literally he starts melting from the inside out. And in that moment, Phoenix just looks down at her and says, go, flee, child. Be gone. And Illyana, she's no fool, right? She's full of vengeance. She's more pissed off than she's ever been in her life. She's Russell Crowe from Gladiator, right? I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. But she flees, right? She takes off. But she does say, I go, witch, for my brother I go. But this is not over. Now, this is a huge thing because Jean Grey immediately succumbs to the power of the Phoenix. Insofar, she just kind of passes out because seemingly she hasn't used a lot of it. And that was kind of a regular thing in the main Marvel universe. When Jean Grey first gained the power of the Phoenix Force, it overwhelmed her pretty frequently to the point that like she would have to take breaks and she would have to kind of bring herself down to a normal level and slowly learn how to harness the power of the Phoenix. I mean, harnessing the power of an omniversal force of energy, that's no small thing, right? That's kind of a difficult thing to do. But when she does collapse, she does seem to fall unconscious, but Wolverine, of course, catches her and just says, hey, right, come on, let's get out of here. And so when Jean Grey finally kind of starts to wake back up as Wolverine's carrying her out, Wolverine says, not long ago, I performed a ritual to right myself in the world. I can't say I got rid of all the bad, but I felt clean coming out of it. Of course, that's the whole experience he had with David Haller when David was getting rid of the brainwashing in Wolverine's mind. And he says, as we walk out of this place that took our bodies, our minds, and warped them, turned them against us and against our friends, I get a similar feeling. I don't know if it'll get rid of all the bad, but it'll go a long way to helping, and a little help's better than none at all. I have learned that the hard way, and it's funny, I don't think I'm the only one that's feeling that way, but that's that broken record. It plays again and again and again. War and peace. Peace and war, a dance between the two. One leads, the other follows. But for how long people can take the bad as a matter of course without wondering if there's something better, something else. We got a habit of tossing the record when it's broken. We like to try and fix things. Find those same grooves, even if we know that it's not possible. Maybe that's the deja vu that I keep talking about. Just a magic trick, an illusion. Maybe I'm tricking myself now, but I like to think this is something different. That's an important statement here because what Wolverine is addressing here is basically human nature. Human nature has historically been war and peace. That's it, right? Depending on who you want to talk to. You know, Thomas Hobbes argued that life was short, brutish, and cruel. So people form a government in order to air grievances. Would the government abuse its power? Possibly, but that's just the price you pay for having an ordered government. Whereas other people, right, John Locke or Jeremy Bentham, might argue that government should function based on a utilitarianist idea. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But regardless of how any kind of organized society comes into existence from a state of nature, the point that Wolverine is making here is that it is inevitable that humanity is going to tear it down and build something back up again. 9 times out of 10, it's because whatever they built becomes corrupted in some capacity. But it's not some invisible force out there pulling the strings, and humans are just leaves in the wind, subject to its whims and wants. No. The governments are human, and societies are human, and humans become corrupted. And so as humans corrupting themselves, and then other humans tearing down everything that is corrupted to build it back up again, hoping that it's better, and maybe it will, maybe it won't. That's the kind of optimism that he's talking about, though. On the surface, it seems like he's kind of leaving this very cynical viewpoint, right? Humans are just crappy, and Thomas Hobbes was right. Life is short, brutish, and cruel. No. It's really more, this could be something new. It could be something better than what it was before. And that's why he says, look at me, another broken record. But maybe I like it that way. How's that for deja vu? So, with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. This is the last issue of Ultimate Wolverine before we get into the return of the Maker. So I'm excited to see where that goes. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.